He married 3 Apache widows, not for love, but for his daughter's life. The man had always lived a simple life on the edge of the wilderness. His cabin stood alone, surrounded by tall pine trees and the quiet hills that stretched for miles. The nearest town was far away, the nearest doctor even farther. He had lost his wife many years ago, leaving him to care for his young daughter alone. The girl was the center of his world. Every morning, he would wake early to light the fire, cook simple meals, and make sure she was safe and warm. He would watch her play with the few toys they had and tell her stories of the land, the animals, and the stars above. She had his laughter, his curiosity, and sometimes his stubbornness. But life on the frontier was never easy. The winters were harsh and the food supply often scarce. One particularly cold season, a sickness came to the cabin that neither father nor daughter had ever experienced. It began with a slight fever, a cough, and weakness that made the little girl too tired to play. At first he tried the remedies he had learned from his own mother long ago, herbs, hot tea, and rest by the fire, but nothing worked. The fever rose, and her small body grew weaker by the day. He began to feel panic. The fear of losing her was unbearable. Nights became long and sleepless as he watched over her. He prayed silently, pleading for some miracle, some solution that could save her life. The thought of what he would do without her filled him with dread. He realized that ordinary means could not help them this time. One day, while searching for ways to help his daughter, he remembered stories he had heard about the Apache people living nearby. They were known for their wisdom in healing, their knowledge of the land, and their unique remedies that sometimes worked when nothing else did. He had little contact with them before. Most of the settlers avoided the tribe, fearing misunderstandings or conflict. The fear of strangers did not matter anymore. What mattered was saving his daughter. The father set out cautiously toward the Apache settlement, carrying his daughter wrapped in blankets. The journey was difficult. The snow crunched under his boots and icy winds bit at his face. His arms ached from carrying the girl, but he pressed on. Every step was a mixture of hope and dread. He worried that the tribe might not welcome him, that they might refuse his request, or worse, that his presence would anger them. Yet the love for his child drove him forward with determination he did not know he possessed. When he reached the settlement, he was struck by its beauty and simplicity. Small homes made of wood and earth were arranged in neat circles. Smoke curled from the chimneys, carrying the smell of cooking fires. People moved about with purpose, tending to children, cooking meals, and caring for the elders. Their eyes watched him carefully as he entered, unsure if he would cause trouble. The father spoke slowly and respectfully, explaining the sickness of his daughter and pleading for help. At first, there was silence. The Apache people were cautious. Outsiders had not always been kind, and trust was earned, not given. But one woman stepped forward, a healer respected by the tribe and known for her skill with both medicine and care. She looked at the girl, felt her pulse, and asked many questions. She moved with calm authority, giving the father hope that perhaps, just perhaps, she could help. The healer spoke plainly. She could treat the child, but her help came with conditions. She had 3 widows living under her guidance. These women depended on her and the community for protection and support, and their lives were fragile in the harsh world they lived in. The healer insisted that the father take responsibility for the 3 women if she was to save his daughter. Marriage, she said, was a form of protection and stability in their way of life. The man was shocked. Marriage to 3 women at once was something he had never imagined. It was not a question of love, desire, or companionship. It was a duty, a responsibility, and a test of character. He felt the weight of the decision pressing on him. He thought about his daughter, pale and weak, and how her life hung by a thread. The choice was clear, yet unbearable. He had never known such a sacrifice, yet he could not turn away from the chance to save her. Days passed as he stayed with the healer and the widows, learning the rhythms of their daily lives. The widows were cautious, keeping their distance, speaking only when necessary. They had suffered losses of their own and were wary of outsiders. The father felt their eyes on him, judging him silently. He understood that trust would take time and that his intentions would matter more than words. Every gesture of respect, every careful step he took was noted by the women. Meanwhile, the healer began treating the girl. She used a combination of herbs, poultices, and careful observation. She instructed the father on how to care for his daughter, how to feed her nourishing foods, and how to protect her from the bitter cold. Slowly, the child began to respond. Her fever dropped, her breathing became steadier, and the first signs of her old strength returned. The father felt relief, but it was mixed with an ongoing sense of responsibility. Saving her life had come at a cost he had never anticipated. The first night he slept in the settlement, he could not rest. He thought about the future, the marriages, the adjustments, and the lives he would intertwine with his own. He worried about how the widows would feel, how the tribe would view him, and how he could protect his daughter while respecting the rules of a culture he barely understood.
He realized that this journey was about more than healing, it was about survival, respect, and courage.
In those long hours of the night, he made a quiet promise to himself. He would do whatever it took to protect his daughter, even if it meant sacrificing his own comfort and desires. He would approach the widows not as a conqueror, but as a protector. He would learn, adapt, and honor the traditions he did not yet understand. In that resolve, he found a strange sense of peace, a knowledge that, though the road ahead was uncertain, he was walking it for the most important person in his life. By morning, the father had begun to see the women not as strangers, but as people with their own grief, resilience, and strength. He realized that the world was larger than his own small cabin, and that survival often meant forging unexpected bonds. The first part of his journey had ended, but the real challenge was only beginning. He had crossed a threshold, stepping into a life where love was not the reason for action, but where duty and courage could change the course of many lives. And so, he stayed, prepared to do whatever was required. The little girl's life was fragile, the widow's lives intertwined with his own, and the path ahead uncertain. But for the first time in days, he felt a glimmer of hope. A hope that in this strange and unexpected place his daughter could survive, and that perhaps together they could find a way to endure whatever hardships lay ahead. The days after the healer had seen the little girl began to change the father's world in ways he had never imagined. While her fever slowly subsided, the healer reminded him of the condition he had to accept if he wanted his daughter to survive. He was to take responsibility for the 3 widows who lived under her guidance. They were women who had lost their husbands, faced the harsh realities of life alone, and depended on the community for protection and survival. At first, the idea seemed impossible. He was a man used to solitude, to living simply with his daughter in a quiet cabin. The thought of marrying 3 women at once was overwhelming. He worried how it would work, how he could manage, and whether the widows would ever accept him. Yet, he also understood that without agreeing to this arrangement, the healer would not continue her care. His daughter's life hung in the balance, and he could not let pride or fear stop him. The healer explained the purpose of the marriages carefully. In her culture, marriage was not always about love or romance. Sometimes it was about protection, survival, and responsibility. By taking responsibility for the widows, he would create a household where all of them could be cared for, where no one would be left vulnerable to the harshness of the world. The women, in turn, would provide care and support for the child, helping ensure she recovered fully. It was an arrangement built on trust and necessity, not on feelings. The father listened and nodded slowly. He thought about his daughter lying weakly in her bed, her small chest rising and falling with difficulty. The image of losing her made his heart ache. He realized that this was more than a choice. It was a test of his courage and his love as a parent. He had to put aside his own comfort and step into a role he had never imagined. When the father first met the widows, he could feel the tension in the air. Each woman had her own story of loss and hardship. Their eyes were cautious, wary of the outsider who now carried the weight of their lives. They spoke little at first, keeping their distance and observing him carefully. He understood their hesitation. He had been a stranger, and strangers often brought trouble. Yet he also saw in their eyes a quiet strength and dignity that commanded respect.
Over the following days, he began learning their routines, the way they prepared meals, tended to the fire, and cared for the little girl. He helped wherever he could, carrying water, chopping wood, and offering small gestures of assistance.
Slowly, the widows began to notice his sincerity. He did not speak much at first, but his actions showed respect and commitment. He did not try to dominate or control. He simply fulfilled his duties step by step, day by day. The healer continued to treat the child with a mixture of herbs, careful observation, and traditional methods that the father had never seen before. She taught him how to make herbal teas, how to prepare poultices, and how to watch for changes in the child's condition. He absorbed every lesson carefully, understanding that the life of his daughter depended on his attentiveness. With each day, the girl grew stronger. Her cough subsided, her cheeks regained color, and she began to smile once more. Even as hope returned, the father could feel the weight of his promise pressing on him. He had agreed to take responsibility for the widows, and that meant more than simply living under the same roof. It meant learning their customs, understanding their language, and respecting their culture. He had to navigate a world very different from his own, one where rules were not written but lived, and where trust was earned slowly. The widows, too, began to notice changes. They had seen men come and go, some selfish, some cruel. But this man's action spoke of genuine care for the child and respect for them. One by one, they started to speak more openly, sharing small pieces of their lives, their fears, and their hopes. The father listened patiently, realizing that these women were not just part of a cultural obligation. They were human beings with stories and emotions, deserving of understanding and kindness. He began to learn more about their daily lives. The widows worked tirelessly to keep the household running. They cooked meals over an open fire, cleaned the small home, and tended to the garden and animals. They also shared stories of their lost husbands, of challenges they had faced, and of the strength that had carried them through difficult times. The father listened without judgment, learning from their resilience and beginning to respect them not only as caretakers for his daughter, but as individuals with wisdom and courage. During this time, the father also reflected on his own life. He had lived in solitude for years, focused only on survival and raising his daughter, but now he was part of something larger. The household required cooperation, patience, and understanding. He realized that survival in this harsh land was not just about individual effort. It was about forming bonds, respecting others, and taking responsibility beyond oneself. There were moments of difficulty. The widows were cautious, and misunderstandings sometimes arose due to differences in culture and language. The father had to learn when to step back, when to listen, and when to act. There were days when he felt frustrated, unsure if he could meet all the expectations placed upon him. But each challenge taught him patience and humility. He discovered that respect and care could bridge even the widest gaps between strangers. As the girl's health improved, the father saw the widow's gentle care in action. They comforted her when she was afraid, encouraged her when she struggled, and celebrated her small victories. They became an unexpected support system, not just for the child, but for him as well. He began to see that the arrangement, though born out of necessity, had the potential to create a household built on mutual respect and shared responsibility. The healer continued to watch closely, guiding him when needed. She reminded him that his role was not to dominate or control, but to protect and nurture. Marriage, in this context, was a bond of duty and care, not of romantic love. The father accepted this fully, understanding that the lives of the three widows and his daughter were now intertwined in ways that required courage, sacrifice, and respect. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the hills and the sky turned shades of pink and orange, the father sat outside with the widows. They shared stories of the land, of animals and seasons, of hardships and small joys. Laughter, though quiet, began to appear in the household. Trust was slowly building, and the father realized that the impossible choice he had made was creating a new kind of family, a family built on survival, care, and mutual respect. He also noticed subtle changes in himself. He was learning to be patient, to listen carefully, and to act with thoughtfulness. His heart, once focused solely on his daughter, began to open in new ways. Not romantic love, but a deep respect and understanding for the women who now shared their lives with him. He saw their strength, their resilience, and their wisdom, and he felt gratitude that they were willing to trust him with their lives. The little girl, now regaining strength, became the center of this new household. Her laughter returned, filling the home with warmth. She played with the widows, learning their ways and sharing her own curiosity.
She became a bridge between the father and the women, a reminder of why this unusual arrangement existed.
Each day, as she grew healthier, the father felt a mix of relief and responsibility. He had succeeded in saving her life, but the real work of maintaining harmony and trust had only begun.
By the end of these early days, the father understood that his decision to agree to the marriages was the right one. It had been a choice born of desperation and love for his daughter, but it was also a decision that demanded courage, patience, and commitment.
The widows, once strangers, were becoming companions in responsibility and guardians of the child's life. Together, they were forming a household that could endure the challenges of the frontier, where survival depended not only on skill and knowledge but on cooperation and trust. The father realized that the path ahead would not be easy. There would be misunderstandings, moments of doubt, and challenges that tested patience and character. But he also knew that the bonds forming now, though not based on romantic love, were strong and meaningful.
He had crossed a threshold into a world where sacrifice created connection, where duty fostered respect, and where the life of his daughter could be preserved through courage and commitment.
And so, as the sun set on another long day, the father felt a quiet sense of hope. His daughter's life was being saved, the widows were slowly learning to trust him, and a new chapter of survival and cooperation was beginning. The days ahead would require careful navigation, understanding, and strength, but he was ready. He had taken the first step into a life that demanded more than he had ever imagined, and he was determined to meet the challenge with courage, patience, and unwavering love for his child.
Life in the small Apache settlement continued to unfold slowly, and the father found himself navigating a world far different from the one he had known.
The little girl was growing stronger each day, her laughter filling the small home and bringing warmth to everyone around her. Yet, as her health improved, the father could not ignore the reality of the arrangement he had agreed to.
The marriages, though born out of necessity, were now official, and the responsibilities they carried were real and demanding. The day of the formal arrangement was quiet and solemn.
There were no celebrations or grand announcements. The Apache healer guided the father through the customs with care, explaining each step and ensuring the widows were included in the process.
The women were cautious, their expressions serious, reflecting both their grief and their need to protect themselves. The father felt the weight of their eyes on him, judging his sincerity, testing his intentions.
He understood that trust was fragile and had to be earned through consistent respect and action. In the first weeks after the formalization, daily life became a careful balance of duties, learning, and observation. The father rose with the sun, helping prepare meals, tending to the small garden, and assisting with chores that kept the household running. The widows, in turn, continued to care for the child, teach the father the ways of their people, and manage the home with skill and quiet authority.
Every day, the father felt both challenged and supported, realizing that this unusual household relied on cooperation, patience, and mutual respect to survive. At first, the widows maintained a cautious distance.
Their grief and past experiences made it difficult for them to trust him completely. They watched his actions closely, noticing whether he treated the child with care, whether he respected their customs, and whether he was willing to put their safety and well-being alongside his own.
The father learned quickly that words alone were not enough. Respect had to be shown through deeds, through careful attention, fairness, and humility. The little girl, now more lively, became a bridge between the father and the widows.
She laughed, played, and learned from them, absorbing their lessons about the land, the animals, and the ways of the Apache people. She called them by affectionate names and often mimicked their actions, bringing small moments of joy to the home.
These moments helped the widows soften toward the father. They began to see his dedication not just as a man fulfilling a duty, but as someone who genuinely cared for the child, and in his own way.
The father also began to understand the widows as individuals, not just as part of a cultural expectation. Each had her own personality, strengths, and story. One was quiet and observant, preferring to work in the garden and watch the world carefully. Another was lively and nurturing, often taking the girl on small walks and teaching her songs of the land.
The third was practical and resourceful, skilled at preparing food and making the home comfortable. Together they created a household where each contribution mattered, where teamwork became essential, and where the father began to learn humility, patience, and appreciation for their wisdom. Despite the gradual improvement in trust, there were moments of tension. Misunderstandings arose, often from differences in language, culture, or expectation. The father sometimes struggled to understand the nuances of the widow's customs, and they occasionally questioned his choices or actions. These moments, though challenging, were also opportunities to grow. He learned to listen carefully, to observe, and to act with thoughtfulness, realizing that respect and patience could bridge even the deepest cultural gaps. The healer remained a guiding presence, helping him navigate these challenges. She reminded him that marriage in their tradition was not about romantic love, but about duty, protection, and care. She emphasized that the well-being of the household depended on his willingness to act with integrity, honesty, and compassion. The father absorbed these lessons, understanding that his role was to create a safe and nurturing environment for both his daughter and the widows, a home where all could survive and even thrive despite the harshness of the world outside. As the weeks passed, small bonds began to form. The widows started to share small stories of their past, moments of joy, and lessons learned from their husbands and families. The father listened intently, never interrupting or judging, simply offering his presence and respect. In return, the widows began to notice his quiet dedication. He did not try to control the household or dominate their decisions. He participated fully and responsibly, earning trust through actions rather than words. The little girl, too, began to understand the complexity of her new home. She saw how the widows cared for her, how they watched over her, and how they guided her growth. She noticed how her father worked alongside them, helping with chores, protecting her, and learning from their experience. In her innocent way, she became the heart of the household, reminding everyone why the arrangement existed and why they must work together. Challenges continued to arise from outside the settlement as well. Settlers from nearby areas, hearing rumors of the unusual household, sometimes approached with suspicion or judgment. They did not understand the arrangements, the customs, or the motivations behind them. The father found himself defending his decisions calmly and respectfully, explaining that his choices were made out of necessity, love for his daughter, and respect for the women he now shared his home with. Over time, even some outsiders began to recognize the sincerity and strength of the household, learning that appearances could be deceiving. Within the home, the father also faced personal growth. He had always relied on his own judgment and independence, but living with the widows required collaboration and compromise. He learned to negotiate decisions, to value their opinions, and to admit when he was wrong. Each challenge strengthened his character and deepened his understanding of what it meant to care for others. He realized that love was not the only foundation of a family. Responsibility, respect, and shared commitment could create bonds just as strong. The household began to settle into a rhythm. Mornings were filled with chores, lessons for the girl, and preparations for meals. Afternoons were quieter, often spent teaching the child skills she would need to survive in the frontier world, or tending to the garden and animals. Evenings were a time of reflection, storytelling, and quiet laughter. Though the marriages were not built on romance, there was a sense of harmony that grew from shared responsibility and mutual respect. The father began to notice small gestures of warmth from the widows. A gentle smile, a shared meal, a word of encouragement. They were subtle signs, but they mattered. He understood that trust was growing, that the household was becoming a family in a way he had never expected. Though love as he had known it in his youth was absent, a different kind of connection was forming, one built on reliability, respect, and shared purpose. At the same time, the father remained ever vigilant about his daughter's health. He applied everything he had learned from the healer, monitoring her condition, ensuring she was fed and rested, and celebrating every small sign of recovery. Her progress gave him hope and reinforced the importance of the household arrangement. Each day she grew stronger, more playful, and more curious, reminding him why he had made the choice to marry the widows and embrace a life that was once unimaginable. The household, though unusual in appearance to outsiders, became a place of safety, learning, and growth. The father, the widows, and the child were united not by love in the traditional sense, but by a shared commitment to survival and care. The challenges of the frontier, Cold winters, scarce resources, and outside judgment were easier to face together than alone. The father learned that family could take many forms and that sometimes necessity and courage could create bonds as meaningful as any other. By the end of these early months, the father felt a sense of accomplishment and quiet pride. He had honored his promise, protected his daughter, and begun to build trust with the widows. He understood that this was only the beginning, that life would continue to bring challenges, testing patience, courage, and commitment, but he was ready. The household had taken shape, not through love alone, but through determination, respect, and shared responsibility. And so, as the sun set over the small settlement, the father watched his daughter play with the widows, her laughter echoing through the home. He felt a quiet sense of hope and purpose. The marriages, though unconventional, had begun to form a household where trust, care, and survival intertwined. Each day was a lesson in patience, respect, and courage, and the father understood that together they could face whatever challenges lay ahead. Life in the small household had begun to settle into a routine, but the father knew that survival on the frontier was never easy. Even as the daughter grew stronger and laughter filled the home, challenges continued to test their unity. The harsh winters were still ahead. Food supplies were limited, and outsiders did not always understand or respect their way of life. The father realized that protecting his daughter and the widows required constant vigilance, patience, and courage. One morning, as the father stepped outside to check the small garden, he noticed tracks in the snow. Someone had been near their settlement overnight. His heart raced. In these parts, strangers could bring danger. Some came to trade, others to steal, and some, sadly, to harm. He carefully observed the tracks, noting the patterns and size. He knew the safety of his household depended on his ability to anticipate threats. The widows, noticing his concern, came to stand beside him. Though they had once been cautious of him, they now trusted his judgment and valued his vigilance. As the days passed, the threat of outsiders became real. Traders came and went, sometimes questioning the arrangement of the household, other times offering advice or help. Some settlers whispered rumors about the man marrying 3 widows at once. Their words were harsh, judgmental, and sometimes cruel. But the father did not respond with anger. Instead, he continued to act with respect and integrity, showing through his actions that his choices were made out of love for his daughter and respect for the women he now shared his life with. Over time, even some of the more skeptical neighbors began to see the household not as unusual or scandalous, but as a place of care, resilience, and courage. Inside the home, the bonds among the father, the widows, and the child continued to grow. The widows had moved past caution and were beginning to trust him fully. Their laughter with the child filled the house, creating a warmth that the father had never expected. The quiet, observant widow shared her knowledge of the land, teaching them which plants were safe to eat, which herbs could be used to heal minor injuries, and how to predict changes in the weather. The lively widow continued to play with the child, teaching her songs, stories, and the traditions of their people. The practical widow kept the home running smoothly, ensuring that meals were prepared, the fire was always lit, and the household was organized. Together they created a harmonious environment where each person contributed and everyone's needs were respected. The father, too, had grown in ways he had not anticipated. He had learned patience, humility, and the value of listening. He had discovered that leadership was not about asserting authority, but about serving others and ensuring the safety and well-being of the family. He had learned to navigate disagreements with care, to respect the traditions and perspectives of the widows, and to make decisions that considered everyone's needs. In the quiet moments, he reflected on how much he had grown since first arriving at the settlement, realizing that the unusual arrangement had transformed him as much as it had shaped the household. There were still challenges, however. Winters were harsh, and one particularly cold spell tested the household's resilience. Snow covered the ground for weeks, making it difficult to find firewood and fresh food. The father and the widows worked tirelessly together, gathering wood, melting snow for water, and rationing supplies carefully. The child, though small, tried to help in her own way, bringing kindling and learning to adapt to the cold. The hardships, while difficult, strengthened their bonds. Each success, no matter how small, reminded them that cooperation, respect, and shared effort could overcome even the toughest obstacles. During this time, the father began to notice subtle changes in his feelings toward the widows.
Though love in the romantic sense had never been part of their union, a deep respect and admiration had grown. He appreciated their strength, their wisdom, and the care they showed not only for his daughter but for him as well. He realized that family could take many forms. Sometimes love was quiet, built on trust, shared responsibility, and mutual respect rather than passion or desire. This understanding brought him peace, allowing him to focus fully on protecting the household and nurturing the bonds that had begun to flourish. The daughter, now healthier and more lively, played an essential role in uniting the household. She laughed with the widows, asked endless questions, and learned about the world around her. She helped carry water, feed the animals, and even practice small chores, always under careful supervision. She became the heart of the home, reminding everyone of why they had come together in the first place. Her presence was a constant motivation for the father to act with courage and integrity, and it reminded the widows of the importance of care, patience, and love, even in unconventional circumstances. The healer continued to guide the father and the widows, offering advice and wisdom when needed. She emphasized that survival was not just about physical strength, but also about emotional resilience, understanding, and respect for one another. The father followed her guidance carefully, learning to anticipate challenges, communicate effectively, and ensure that the household functioned as a unit. Over time, he became not just a caretaker but a partner in maintaining the safety, health, and harmony of the home. Outside the settlement, rumors continued to circulate, but the father paid little attention. He knew that outsiders would never fully understand the household, and he had learned to focus on what truly mattered: the safety and well-being of his daughter and the widows. He realized that judgment from others was insignificant compared to the bonds they had formed, the challenges they had overcome, and the trust they had built. His focus remained on protecting the household, ensuring that each day brought progress, growth, and stability. As the months passed, the household continued to thrive. The widows had become skilled mentors to the daughter, teaching her practical skills, cultural knowledge, and values that would serve her for the rest of her life. The father had grown into a role he had never imagined, learning leadership, patience, and compassion. The home had become a place of safety, learning, and resilience, where challenges were met together and victories, no matter how small, were celebrated collectively. The father also began to reflect on the unusual journey that had brought them together. What had begun as a desperate attempt to save his daughter had evolved into something far greater. He had entered a world of new customs, challenges, and responsibilities, and through courage, patience, and respect, he had helped create a household that could endure the harsh realities of frontier life. The arrangement, though unconventional, had brought healing, safety, and growth to everyone involved. Despite the hardships, moments of joy and connection were abundant. Evenings were filled with shared stories around the fire, songs sung by the widows, and laughter from the child. Small gestures, a kind word, a smile, a shared task, built trust and reinforced the sense of family that was forming. The father realized that survival was not just about food, fire, or shelter, but about connection, care, and the bonds that held them together. Through it all, the father understood the true meaning of sacrifice and responsibility. He had married not for love, but for duty, and in doing so, he had protected his daughter's life. Yet, in the process, he had also created a home built on trust, respect, and shared effort. He had learned that family could take many forms, that love could be quiet and practical, and that courage was measured not just by facing danger, but by the willingness to care for others selflessly. By the end of this period, the household had become strong and resilient. The father had earned the trust of the widows, the daughter was thriving, and together they had overcome the challenges of the frontier with patience, wisdom, and shared effort. The world outside might still judge them, misunderstand them, or challenge them, but inside the home they had built a safe, nurturing, and supportive environment where life could flourish. And so, as the sun set over the hills once again, the father looked out across the small settlement, feeling a quiet pride and satisfaction. The marriages, once a source of fear and uncertainty, had become a source of strength, and the household had grown into a true family. The daughter laughed nearby, the widows worked with care, and the father understood that he had achieved something extraordinary. Not through romance or passion, but through courage, sacrifice, and unwavering dedication. The seasons continued to change, and with them, the small household settled into a rhythm of resilience, care, and quiet joy. The daughter had grown healthier and stronger than anyone could have hoped. Her laughter now filled the cabin from morning until night, echoing through the trees and reaching the hearts of everyone around her. The father watched her closely, amazed at how far she had come from the frail child he had carried through the snow so many months ago. Every small step she took, every word she spoke, reminded him of why he had made the impossible choice to marry the three widows. Life was still not easy, but the household had become stronger than any one of them could have been alone. The widows continued to play essential roles, each contributing in her own way. The quiet widow taught the child patience and observation, showing her how to read the sky, track animals, and understand the rhythms of the land. The lively widow encouraged the child's creativity, teaching her songs, stories, and the wisdom hidden in everyday life. The practical widow made the home a place of comfort and order, ensuring that meals were prepared, fires were kept burning, and everything ran smoothly. Together, they formed a household where every action, every effort, and every word had meaning. The father, too, had changed in ways he had never imagined. He had grown patient, thoughtful, and respectful. He had learned that leadership was not about asserting authority, but about serving others and nurturing those in his care. He had come to understand that family could take many forms, and that love was not always expressed in romance, but in trust, loyalty, and shared responsibility. He was proud of the household they had built, proud of the widow's courage, and proud of the strength and spirit of his daughter. The little girl thrived in the love and attention she received. She learned quickly, absorbing the lessons of the widows and her father alike. She helped with chores, tended to the small garden, and even assisted in minor preparations of meals, all under careful supervision. Her curiosity was boundless, and she asked endless questions about the land, the animals, and the ways of the people around her. The father marveled at her energy, realizing that the bond between him, the widows, and his daughter had grown into something deeper than he could have imagined. It was a bond of survival, respect, and mutual care, strong enough to withstand the harshest challenges of life on the frontier. Outside threats continued, as they always did, but the household faced them together. The father and the widows worked as a team, sharing responsibility for defense, resource management, and guidance. Rumors from outsiders sometimes persisted, but they no longer affected the household as they once had. They had built a world of their own, one where trust and cooperation mattered more than judgment or gossip. The father realized that the opinions of others could never outweigh the safety, happiness, and growth of his family. Over time, the widows began to show the quiet signs of affection and connection. Their trust in the father had grown, and they saw that he had acted with honesty, courage, and care at every turn. Though the marriages had never been born of romance, there was a growing bond of respect and understanding. Small gestures, a shared laugh, an encouraging word, a helping hand, built a foundation of harmony and mutual reliance. The father recognized that love could exist in many forms and that trust, respect, and shared purpose were as meaningful as any passion or romance. The healer continued to visit occasionally, offering guidance and wisdom. She observed the household with approval, noting the care, patience, and resilience that had formed over the months. She reminded the father that his greatest achievement was not simply saving his daughter's life, but creating a home where survival, learning, and connection could flourish. The household had become a place where every member mattered, every effort was appreciated, and every life was valued equally. As the daughter grew older, she began to understand her own place within this unusual family. She saw how the widows cared for her, how her father protected her, and how the household depended on cooperation and shared effort. She learned to appreciate the lessons of patience, courage, and responsibility, and she grew into a child who could navigate the challenges of the world with confidence and wisdom. Her presence reminded everyone that their sacrifices and efforts had meaning beyond themselves, that the household they had built together was stronger and more meaningful than any one of them could have imagined. The father often reflected on the journey that had brought them together. He remembered the fear and desperation he had felt when his daughter was sick, the impossible choice he had faced, and the uncertainty of entering a world so different from his own. He realized that the decisions he had made, though difficult and unconventional, had created something extraordinary. They had formed a family bound not by traditional love, but by courage, care, and mutual respect, a family capable of facing any challenge together. Through all the trials, the household had remained resilient.
Winters were survived, food was gathered, and threats from outsiders were managed with careful planning and cooperation. The daughters' health and happiness became a measure of their success, and every day brought new lessons and small victories. The father took pride in the widow's contributions, in their courage, and in the household they had built together. He understood that love had taken a different form here, one that was practical, enduring, and deeply meaningful.
As the years passed, the household became well known in the surrounding area, not for scandal, rumor, or gossip, but for its strength, resilience, and harmony.
Travelers and neighbors who once questioned the father's choices came to respect the way the household operated, recognizing that courage, care, and dedication could build a family stronger than convention alone.
The father felt a quiet satisfaction knowing that the decisions he had made had not only saved his daughter's life, but had created a lasting home where respect, trust, and survival worked together. The daughter continued to grow into a spirited, intelligent, and capable young girl.
She learned the skills she would need for life on the frontier, absorbed the wisdom of the widows, and carried herself with confidence and kindness. She remained the heart of the household, a living reminder of why the father had made the sacrifices he did.
Watching her flourish, he felt a profound sense of fulfillment and relief. She had survived, thrived, and grown surrounded by care, love, and respect. In the evenings, the family would gather around the fire. The father would share stories of the land. The widows would sing songs or tell tales, and the daughter would laugh, ask questions, and absorb every word. These moments became sacred, a time of connection, learning, and reflection. Though their family had begun in necessity, it had grown into something far greater, a household built on shared effort, respect, and the quiet strength of mutual care. The father often marveled at the unexpected turns his life had taken. He had entered this world to save his daughter, never imagining the bonds he would form, the lessons he would learn, or the home he would create. The widows had become partners in life, teachers and guides, helping to nurture not only his child but him as well. Together they had built a life that was stable, meaningful, and resilient, a life that would endure long after the challenges of the frontier had passed.
Though the marriages had never been about romantic love, the father had come to understand that love could take many forms. There was the love of a parent, fierce and protective, the love of trust, respect, and shared purpose, and the quiet affection that grew from mutual reliance and shared experience.
Each day, the household demonstrated that love was not always dramatic or passionate. It could also be steady, dependable, and deeply fulfilling. By the time the seasons had turned several times, the father knew that his choice had been the right one.
His daughter had survived, the widows had found security and purpose, and together they had created a household that could withstand any challenge. Their bonds were stronger than fear, hardship, or doubt. They had formed a family not through tradition or expectation, but through courage, sacrifice, and unwavering care. And so, as the sun set over the quiet hills surrounding the settlement, the father watched his daughter play with the widows, her laughter ringing through the trees. He felt a deep sense of peace. The unusual marriages that had begun out of necessity had created something extraordinary. They had forged a family where trust, respect, and dedication held them together, and where every life mattered equally. He realized that sometimes survival required choices that seemed impossible, but that those choices could lead to love in its most enduring and meaningful form. In the end, the household thrived, not because of romance or passion, but because of courage, resilience, and commitment.
The father, the widows, and the daughter had built a home where life could flourish, where challenges were met together, and where every day was a lesson in patience, respect, and care.
Their story was a testament to the power of selflessness, the strength of human connection, and the enduring bonds that can grow even from the most unexpected beginnings.